Morning, everybody. My name is Tony Minnick, and I'm the farm manager for CCUA. Welcome to another Garden Side Chat. Carrie's out of town this week, so instead of the home garden tour, we're going to be going around at the Columbia Agriculture Park that we've been working to develop in our program for Planting for the Pantry. We've had a busy spring getting a ton of food out of the ground, and what we're going to be looking at today is the status of the production area on a summer morning, a beautiful summer morning. We'll take a little walk around, and if you have any questions, if you're watching live or afterward, feel free to post those in the comments. I'll try to take any questions along the tour if they come up, and we can kind of get into the nitty-gritty of certain things, but we'll otherwise kind of do a sort of overview of our whole area here. So we've been cover cropping this area the last several years, building soil fertility, decompacting the soil. We've delivered and spread a fair bit of compost in this area and done soil tests to target specific mineral deficiencies we were lacking, as this was a somewhat abused site for years before this as the Boone County Fairgrounds, the site of a very compacting of the soil tractor pull, and then years as a soccer field area. So a lot of the work we've done has made great improvements, and we've been able to grow a lot of really healthy crops out of the ground this year. So many thanks to our Planting for the Pantry donors that have made this stuff possible, and hopefully you'll get a little insight into what the day-to-day looks like around here. As we're entering into the field, you'll notice this, what a lot of people from Ash Street say is a nice-looking stand of corn. It's actually a 10-way cover crop species mix that we've been using to build fertility, like I said, and in this case really work to suppress perennial weeds that have existed on the site. So for years, it's been occupied by a low-growing mowed stand of fescues, other annual grasses, and a lot of Bermuda grass and bindweed, which a lot of gardeners know can be the total bane of your existence if you're trying to grow vegetables without herbicide. So we've been using this opportunity to grow beneficial insect attracting, organic matter building, diversity of plants that can outcompete those perennial weed species. In the case of last year, we grew an entirely sorghum Sudan grass crop, which grows really rapid, fast, can be mowed multiple times per year, and offers a lot of organic matter that can then be incorporated into the soil. This year, to increase the diversity of what we're feeding our microbes underground and increase the aesthetic look of the cover crop here as people are driving by and wondering what's going on, we've included pearl millet, which is not in this frame, but in the distance you can see long seed heads as a grass, very vertical growing, so it's good at creating shade like the sorghum Sudan grass to outcompete the lower lying perennial weeds. This is the sorghum Sudan grass growing here. It's about to seed out. And we will be mowing this cover crop actually probably at the end of the day today. So you're seeing it for the last time this season. As these start to leaf out, they're starting to go from a vegetative state where they can offer a lot more easily digested nitrogen and fertility of the soil to a more carbonaceous stage where they'll be harder to break down into the soil. So trying to mow it at that stage. This one's called foxtail millet. It's got a little foxtail on it. All the volunteers like kind of playing with them because they feel like a little mouse in your hand. And then we have a lot of different legume species in here that work with a bacterium to fix atmospheric nitrogen into nitrogen fertility for our plants. So mung beans and cowpeas are the main species we've thrown into the mix for that. And then there's a Phacelia flower in the mix. You can't really see because it's been dwarfed now. And a lot of low-growing, 4 foot tall or so Paradovicia sunflower that we got, which you can see are kind of, a lot of them are a little past bloom now, but they're kind of thrown into the mix for some good forage for birds and insects, as well as some beauty for us. So we'll keep this up until the afternoon, and then we're going to mow this and put in a winter cover crop of, things that'll overwinter and provide coverage and food for our microbial world under the soil all throughout the winter, preventing erosion and feeding the soil. And that'll go in a few weeks. We can enter over this way. The idea is that we've sort of grown the cover crop on the borders of our field here to keep the outer on the exterior Bermuda grass and bindweed from encroaching in. And then additionally, we are working it into a multi-year crop rotation sequence. So it's kind of hard to see without an aerial, but in this area here, we're growing what was our spring crops into summer crops. and this will become a cover crop next season. Over to my, or straight ahead to the left of the camera, was a quadrant that was entirely put into cover crop this year to really fight back the weeds, and next year we'll move our production vegetables into that crop. The far quadrant in the caddy corner is where we've also grown a lot of our summer crops, and that'll become a cover crop next year. So you can see this is kind of like a 4-quadrant rotation. One day we'll probably have the perennial weeds under control and can do a little less intensive cover cropping, but this model of what's called bioextensive growing has had us dedicating a lot of ground to building soil fertility, fighting weeds. So we're only really cropping about half of our current use in vegetables. This plot right here, we have some folks with the City Care program working, doing some cultivation of our collard greens. They're just a little 3-week-old plant size right now. We usually grow collards all throughout the growing season. They can be put in, in March, early April, like a lot of your spring greens are, but they're very warm tolerant. They love the southern heat. So as long as we can keep the pest loads at bay, we'll often have them producing all the way until the end of the year. But because harlequin beetles, cabbage worms, flea beetles are all things we're regularly facing as pests, we often will, mid-July or so, start a second succession of collard greens, so that by the time we potentially are starting to lose our first succession, we're putting in a good fall crop that'll be really fresh, fresh fertility that we've applied to the soil through fertilizers based on soil tests. These guys will be kicking off into gear now, and then they'll be our fall crop that we harvest. The hoops, although they're not donning the insect netting right now, are what we use as just a physical barrier to keep a lot of the insect pests like the cabbage worm moth out of the crop. We'll take the insect netting that is a very fine mesh. A company called ProtectNet sells the 0.25 gram mesh material, and we'll tack that down to the sides of the beds with these sandbags here that we just have to refill every few years or so. They'll occasionally photo degrade, but they're a longer lasting weight than others I've used. And then you can see kind of we're working on a pretty narrow type of bed, unlike the urban farm, the Veterans Urban Farm where we've been the last years. We've reduced that 48-inch bed path to a 30-inch bed, allowing for very ergonomic walking, to the sides of the bed for harvesting. You can easily step over a bed into a narrow pathway. So not only is it more ergonomic for us to move around, but we're also pairing that with reduced walkway sizes to be able to put more surface area of bed space into production, as opposed to the large 3-foot wide walkways we've had at the urban farm the last many years. As far as how we're doing irrigation, you can see here on display a lot of our beds are strawed and the irrigation is in some cases buried, but out here, because this won't be as long a standing crop, we've got drip irrigation in place. So from headers at the very front we can look at later, we're bringing water through a pressure regulator to a header that draws on a little ball valve per line, so we can control per bed how many beds we're watering at a time under the pressure of this watering system from the hydrant, as well as we can control even line to line within a bed, because each line has its own valve. The benefits of the drip irrigation in our case is that we're able to put water directly where the plant's roots are that we're trying to grow, and not the potential weed roots that are coming up in pathways that would be watered with a sprinkler or a more widely covering system. The drip irrigation we use here is on 6-inch emitters, so in the drip line there's small slits you can really probably not even see with a camera, they're so thin, but when this is under pressure, each 6 inches will emit beads of water somewhat slowly, and slowly water the beds without any erosion happening. We're not dumping water at once and then it washes out. We're kind of giving them a nice, nourishing, slow water for, at least once a week. When they're not getting a lot of rain, maybe twice a week, depending on the crop, for an hour or two. The idea is to get that inch of water to the plants in total per week. Beyond these folks doing some stirrup-hoeing here, we have our okra crop. We're doing a red and a green variety this year, red in the near bed. Because we do such intensive succession planting at our sites, we often don't get our summer crops in until a little bit later compared to a lot more competitive spring gardeners. So our tomatoes and peppers and okra this year didn't even get in, I think, until early to mid-June, which is quite late even for us. We had a really wet year out here, and one of the downsides to doing some more of the intensive tillage and soil work to prepare for spring crops is you can't sometimes get in to the field. So whereas at the Veterans Urban Farm, where we do a no-till permanent bed system and all you got to do is rake back the straw or the cover crop that was covering the bed over the winter, out here we have to put down our cover crop and get in and get the soil worked up to build beds. So we're kind of looking more like a corn and bean farmer in terms of getting in the spring. So that's resulted in some relatively short okra for this stage, but we just started harvesting that okra last week. Just got the first 5 pounds or so, so coming up we'll be really ramping that up and getting a three-day-a-week harvest in. Similarly, we got our tomatoes in a little late this year, but we've been growing heirloom pink varieties. It's a little diversity of tomato offered to the central pantry in town, but still not growing anything that's too out of the blue or too odd looking for folks picking up. This is a Brandywine bed and a German Johnson bed, and you can sort of see at this image they're trellised using kind of a hybrid on the Florida basket weave style. So instead of moving around individual plants, we just tie them in between T-posts on 6-foot centers. And I don't have the equipment on me now, but I'll use a big roll of tomato trellis twine. Unfortunately, it is a plastic-based material that results in some waste at the end of every year, but I find that a lot of the kind of more natural fiber type stuff usually degrades under the weight of the tomatoes and will break down before the season's even over, resulting in me having to do a lot more work over and over again. So this waste product, though, is really good at keeping them up all year under a lot of weight bearing, and we'll just start at the front of the bed, tie at the most recently acquired height level, and I'll use a pipe actually as a PVC pipe extension about 1.5 feet to extend my reach, so when I'm down here I can swing it over the top of a T-post and run down to more efficiently tie up the tomatoes and not have to keep getting up and down the entire way over 100-foot length bed. These are not producing quite yet, so we're definitely slower than those first to market, but you can see down low they're all sizing up pretty good now. And these are actually some of the smaller ones. Even down the bed we've got a lot of impressive sized heirlooms. Haven't really had any pest or otherwise issues. Sometimes in the areas where there's less straw applied on the ground, we'll have more splash up in a rain event on the soil, so that some of the fungal spores and things common in the surface of the soil might splash up onto the lower leaves. So the straw is really helpful where we have that thick. Occasionally we'll deal with the tomato hornworm showing up, but it's usually scoutable early on. We're able to just go down the bed and see, because they usually attack the topmost growth. We'll see their frass they leave behind, as well as the eating out of the topmost leaves that, we can usually just spot the worm and pick it off. But when that gets really intense, we'll use the organic spray BT, the company name's Dipel, and we'll use that to target worms, especially if there's a large population of smaller army worms or otherwise. Can head over this way now. I'm not pulling on the cord here. So this was just set up yesterday. These 4 beds here are a summer seeded carrot crop. We have actually done a stale seed bed to prepare for these carrot crops. So a stale seed bed technique is where we would build by shaping these 4 raised beds and not put the carrot seed in, but water them as though we had for 2 weeks to germinate all of the weed seeds on the surface of the soil. And for a carrot crop, that's really important because we're seeding these really tight. We're putting the rows really tight. So it's going to be really hard once we do germinate our carrots to get in with a hoe or an ergonomic form of cultivating weeds out of the carrots. But what we'll do is just grow all those weeds as if they're a crop. And then after 2 weeks of them germinating, really quickly just rage through the bed with stirrup hose. We could probably knock out all those weeds in less than 30 minutes, maybe even 15, 20 minutes. And then after that 2 week of cultivating weeds, killing them, we have a very cleared weed seed bank in the surface of where we're going to put our carrot seeds. So then yesterday we put carrot seeds into a much less weedy bed. And so these are the 4 beds. We might have overwatered a little bit on the drip irrigation overnight. You can see the water's drained through the beds and into the walkways in some areas, but we're just currently using 4 rows of carrots with a drip line per row of carrot because it's so hot out. I didn't want to put in our sprinkler system into effect. I also didn't want to throw too much sprinkler water on our cucumber and tomato foliage in the process of germinating carrots because of the potential fungal issues and weed seeds that'd be germinating in those beds. But you can see here these sprinkler heads are set up to water about 4 beds in either direction of the sprinkler heads. They're also run off of a 15 psi pressure regulator, and they're a system called wobblers. So if you're growing on a market garden scale, these are really effective. The water pressure comes up through this PVC standpipe that we've just cut and fitted with these Seninger brand wobbler heads, and the water hits the top of the head and starts to spin this in one direction, so that as it's spinning around it shoots water. And there's all sorts of different heads, sizes, and pressure regulators, so you can very much pinpoint your controls on your sprinkler lines. And we can really easily just pop these rebar up and take the sprinkler system out and run it down another bed if we so desire. So might look like some redundancy here. We're not actually using this right now because this is so much more of an efficient movement of water straight to where the crop is. But if we were doing a spring or fall large seeding section, doing like 8 beds at a time, which we sometimes will be doing, this would be a really great system to be efficiently watering 8 beds at a time with a lot of control. So these will probably be coming up. We just seeded them yesterday. In the course of the next 2 weeks, with these warm temperatures, we'll hopefully just keep it moist on the surface at all times. This bed here that's glowing and full of pollinators right now, the honeybees just go wild for it, is a buckwheat cover crop. So if you've ever had buckwheat in your buckwheat pancakes or using it as a gluten-free grain, it's a really common, well, it's not super common, but you can find it at Whole Food stores and stuff. We grow it not for the seed harvest, but for all of its ecological benefits it offers to the farm. So you can, I don't know if the camera could catch this, but if you're up close and personal, you could take any given square foot of this patch right now and find several bees humming and buzzing plant to plant for the buckwheat's nectar. Not only is it a great pollinator food source in this late summertime when it's kind of a decreased nectar time for honeybees, it's also a really great coverage for our beds in very narrow windows over the summer. So whereas some cover crops like a clover or an overwintered rye or peas or oats or vetch, you'd kind of need many months to really get the benefits out of the cover crop to justify the seed costs and the time for establishment. Buckwheat is really easy to germinate. The seed is really cheap. We can do this whole bed for just a few bucks, and it reaches this mature stage of flowering after just 50 or so days. So the way I usually use it in our farming production is between windows where I've gotten a spring crop out or a mid kind of summer crop out, like carrots or beets that you planted in the spring, and I only have, let's say, 2 months between that crop coming out and a fall crop I want to get in, like a lettuce or a radish or a kohlrabi. So I'm taking advantage of a 60-day window or 70-day window to seed this, have it come up 50 days later, somehow knock it down with a weed whacker or a mower, and then incorporate it into the soil using a harrow or tines to work it in, or covering the bed with tarps so that earthworms and the microbes are kind of doing that breakdown and bringing it into the soil. And then this bed has spent a lot less time being exposed to the elements. It's not washing out. And all the while I'm creating organic matter that's going to be used to incorporate into the soil to feed more organic matter to the microbes. Buckwheat is also a phosphorus scavenger, so it does a good job pulling up hard for the plants to access mineralized phosphorus that then becomes more available to the next crop. So there's a lot of benefits from that, and it's really easy to grow. You do need to keep some water on it. It can't just go without irrigation, but if I needed to, that's why I have that little sprinkler line set up to run real quick. The crop over here, we have pickling cucumbers. I've gone with the little leaf variety pickling cucumber for years now. It'd be fun to do a little more variety. I personally love the Armenian cucumbers and some of the longer crazy ones, but for our purposes the pantry doesn't get as many little pickling sized cucumbers as they get large slicers for wraps and sandwiches and dipping. The little leaf is a parthenocarpic type cucumber, which means that it doesn't require pollinators. It's sort of like self-fertile within the plant. So for the first couple months or so of growing this crop after transplanting, I'll usually have it covered with insect netting in the summer, which severely cuts down on the cucumber beetle, which then can spread the cucumber mosaic virus that we get through their fecal material. So I'll just keep coverage on these beds until they start to actually be ready to harvest, because the blooms don't need to be hit by honeybees or other pollinators. And then honeybees will hop in here and go crazy once I pull the netting off. And we harvest them 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because like okra, like pole beans, like peas, you can really quickly miss the ideal harvesting window for those crops. And if we go, without a Friday harvest, coming back on Monday, there'll be giant, seedy, pithy fruits that we no longer really want to take to the pantry. So we usually will grow this as a succession. We'll do a late May seeding, an early June transplanting, maybe even one more early July planting. That way we'll be able to stagger our windows of harvest throughout the season. But this crop is just going crazy right now. We just got 60 pounds off it for one of the first big harvests yesterday. And that'll increase to probably over 100, 130 pounds a day coming up just from these 200-foot length beds. Very productive. And as I mentioned before, you can kind of see the cover crop growing here. We'll take a walkway along its side to get to our other quadrant. It's amazing to see all the birds that have come back to the park, and pollinators and little rodents, unfortunately, that sometimes can eat crops, but there's usually so much to eat here I don't really notice any real damage effects. You can see, since we've taken the netting off, that some of this cucumber crop has been starting to be affected by the mosaic virus. Some of this off-coloration or discoloration. Cucumber beetles will take munches into the plants, and in their open wounds, the fecal matter that'll result there will often spread that cucumber mosaic virus to the plants. At this stage, though, they're so far ahead and already peaking with their harvest that we won't really have to worry about losing the crop before we already get our hundreds of pounds per bed. So here, this is what we're calling Quadrant C. This is the other production area for this particular year. And the plot ahead of me here is mostly all sweet peppers. We grow a lot of peppers for the pantry. It's a really quick to be taken up, very versatile vegetable ingredient. And we usually grow all of our peppers to the red ripe stage. They're usually more expensive to find at the store that way. They're so much more nutrient dense for consumers than the green bell peppers. And so that's what we like to offer to the pantry when they might otherwise just have a lot of green peppers or whatever. It adds a lot of value, I think, to consumers there. So we are growing some of the more long frying type Italian peppers, a variety called Carmen in this bed, and then otherwise large, really large bell peppers that will size up to a nice red stuffable type pepper. I don't know if you can see any of the fruit sizing up on some of these plants, but they're taking off. Maybe behind you you could show some of those peppers sizing up. But the way we're doing the vertical training of these peppers this year is using a mix of 4-foot tall oak stakes and just some leftover bamboo stakes we got from a donation. And in the past, I've tried using a Florida weave with twine to try to tie them up, but I find that the weave, even more so than for tomatoes, for peppers, as it pulls the plants into a central line of posts, it exposes a lot of the fruits to the sun and kind of prevents the peppers from reaching their natural bushy state. And peppers, even more than most things, are so sensitive to sunburn on the fruits that can really quickly damage your fruits. So I like to use this a post every 3 feet, and then we're using a little bit of twine down low just to lightly hold up the plants from falling into the walkways. we plant them pretty tight as it is. So these are 12 or 18 inch spacing depending on the variety, staggered in the bed. So they're kind of staggered between 2 rows per bed. And you can see these are really well filled out. The canopies really cover the entire width of the bed and shade out a lot of the fruits in development. And then these posts just help in a wind event or whatever to keep the fruits from the load of the fruits from bearing the fruit plants down into the walkways and making it hard to harvest, making it more likely for them to get pathogens taken up from the soil contact. So it's worked really well for us so far. We did straw the walkways here as well as strawing the plants to produce healthier, happy plants that don't have to worry about temperature changes being so drastic in the day, don't have to worry about as many weeds germinating up because that straw is preventative, keeps a lot of more moisture from evaporating off the surface of the beds, and provides just a more habitable environment for microbes in the soil that are doing our nutrient cycling for us. We have one random bed I had to squeeze in here of tomatoes. I think it's another pink heirloom variety. I think it might be, what's it called? I think it might be Brandywine. We have that, and that's similarly to the other 2 beds. Just starting to size up some really large fruits now. We'll probably have them ready for pantry in 2 weeks. We talked about the collards in our other quadrant. This would be the example of our spring sown collard greens. I can kind of lift a bag up here if you want to throw the camera in. We'll use this netting, to keep insects out. We have to keep the holes pinched or sealed or sewn up because oftentimes birds will get in here, and we're not trying to have that food safety issue on our hands. So it's really important to keep these really tight, closed off. And this is a crop that's been in the ground since April, has produced several hundred pounds per bed already, and as long as we can continue to keep the pest loads under control, we'll continue to produce until the late fall. So as this one kind of slows down, unless we side dress more fertility, the production will just kind of slow down a little bit. I'd love to figure out more of a fertility program mid-season for a crop because, in theory, you could keep these things pumping out later into the fall. But at the very least, we'll have our second succession picking up. So even as these reduce to maybe just a few totes per bed per week, that'll have, in a few weeks, a 5 tote per bed type quantity. And then one of our last plot areas over here has 2 hot pepper beds. A lot of clients at the Central Pantry really love the diversity of hot peppers we bring. So I wouldn't even be able to remember them all offhand right now, but ají chinchi amarillos, shishitos, habaneros, serranos, jalapenos, banana peppers, pickling banana peppers, the little Brazilian Biquino peppers. We like to just bring a ton of variety. It's something I don't think get a lot of the diversity of. They might get jalapenos, but not a lot of the other things that really can make a meal perfect. So we grow currently 2 beds of hot peppers here, and then they're surrounded by a buckwheat cover crop that is just now entering full bloom. Again, you can't probably see the feast of pollinators out there, but they're going crazy. You might even hear the subtle buzzing, the humming of vibration in the field here. We used these sprinkler lines like in the other plot to get a really quick germination of this stand, and this is a perfect example. This was a minimally summer cropped area because we had all of our spring crops in here. So these 5 buckwheat beds followed our spring removal or harvest of bok choy, kohlrabi, turnips, radishes, and lettuces. And they're just going to be covering the ground for another 2 weeks, blooming for the bees before we put those down. And we've already seeded back 3 weeks ago our kohlrabi, bok choy, lettuces, and turnips for the fall crop we'll be doing for the pantry. So just a quick coverage, offers a lot of benefits. We're going to put it down and then get those fall crops in the next 2 weeks.
On the variety of peppers, we asked if they're mixed in. How do you know which pepper is which when you guys are harvesting?
Yeah, that's a good question. At this stage, I do write it all down. So what I usually do to make it easy is I want to do a lot of variety. So I don't want to do one whole bed of habaneros. I don't even know if the pantry could go through that spicy peppers. But I'll do them in 1/4 blocks. So like this bed is a late to harvest variety bed This bed is an early to harvest variety bed, and I'll choose peppers that are more like 70 to 80 days to maturity for the early to harvest. So that's like your shishitos, your ahis, your early jalapenos. And then I'll know those are the first crops, or that's the first bed I should patrol to harvest and make sure I'm not missing any that are ready. We actually do have some serranos at the end of that bed already, and I just take good notes on what, the first, second, third, and fourth quadrants of that block are. The later varieties are your habaneros. What else is really late for us? The like a mole type pepper is usually in that mix. The Mad Hatter, which is a fun one. It forms like a little hat shape as a spicy chili pepper. It's actually relatively mild though too. You can cut it raw if you like spice and put it on a salad or directly into a dish. But yeah, so we kind of just take good notes on that. The last crop I wanted to talk about is the Swiss chard. This is another example. It's relatively pest free for us. I don't know if other people experience that, but at both of the sites where I've grown this, we rarely have to put any netting or do anything pest control wise. So it's a crop that we put in April, like the collard greens, keep it uncovered, and although it also struggles with needing a little boost of a foliar feed in the midsummer or a side dressing of some nutrient-rich compost, it'll produce all the way until the fall. A really nice leafy green crop. I love to use it for all sorts of things, and it's the most mild green as far as a nutrient-dense cooking green, in my opinion. So I'll put it, I'll just strip the leaves off the ribs and put it directly into smoothies and things like that, because you can kind of hide the flavor in with your fruits or peanut butter or whatever else you're using. And that kind of brings us to the end of this crop area. So we've already donated, 9,000 or 10,000 pounds from this area, in addition to all the work we're doing at the Veterans Urban Farm for planning for the pantry. It's an exciting time to be here, especially before I take down the cover crop and put in a new one in the next few weeks. But if you all have any questions to follow up, please leave questions in the comments. We can get to them later if you're not able to watch this live. And keep tuning into the Garden Side Chats. I'm glad we got to do a tour out here and see the farm at this stage.